Abandoning the egg boiling concerns, Savior, we sincerely rejoice in your extensive deeds. Perfect pure holy gurus from the billowing clouds of God. Please let fall a rain of profound and extensive Dhamma upon the receptacles of the exactly as their need. May whatever better and in particular may it cause the essence of Prabhupada's teaching. Shri Joshi Mendo Tamre Shi Niden Yen Padi Sanji Shindo Medeo Yeroku Anamda Shilanjo Parsho. And all sentient beings be able to practice and rationalize the teachings of the first one lost on Japa, who had reality of pure way of life in a and accomplish the yoga of the two stages of supreme bliss and emptiness. Idam Guru Radha Mandala Kamiyataya. From the hearts of the perfect pure Father and Sons, and combining into one into my crown, white nectar, the color of milk, flows through the opening tube of white light, cleansing all my sicknesses, spirit harms, negative karmas, and obscures, and the imprints without exception. My body becomes as pure and clear as crystal. Bimete wete chen chen rezi, jime kembe wambo jambe yang, dama male jomze samveda, kanchen kembe tsugen tsongkapa, losan trabe shabla sovande. Chen rezi, jime kembe wambo jambe yang, dama male jomze samveda, kanchen kembe tsugen tsongkapa, losan trabe shabla sovande. Chenrezi, Chime Kimbe, Wambo Jambe Yang, Tohu Malo Jamse Sangwe, Kanchin Kimbe Tsugin Tsungkapa, Losan Trabe Shala Sowande. Sanji Chedan Tsojin Chonum La, Chanchu Bardu Dane Kyabsun Che, Dagi Chushi Gibin Tsonum, Dholam Benche Sanjin Drupara Sho. Sanji Chedan Tsojin Chonum La, Chanchu Bardu Dane Kyabsun Che, Dagi Chushi Gibin Tsonum, Dholam Benche Sanjin Drupara Sho. Sanji Chedan Tsojin Chonum La, Chanchu Bardu Dane Kyabsun Che, Dagi Chushi Gibin Tsonum Gi, Dholam Benche Sanjin Drupara Sho. 강기 투진이 존에 따와 덤제 밤비치를 담비춘 된제 거듭 제라 창제로. Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Hi. Good morning. Did you have a good sleep?
It's okay. 난거 나디는 봐. 소칼 찍으려 봐. Dangso kal chingro yinsra.
Mm.
Tanda mi chikpo soro zre danyi chi lo peshi lo yas le dingi chi. Kupani tsu lesra. Anko le dan dus chini gemo geni nga dus. Ani nge tsu shos le. Nga kubja chi nga dede nga chi wei. Anko ko nga la ko tiwa chigi yosa. Yayas la. Nga inji ya wo mes la. Anko ma dene anko ko kiesa ki nami di Yachak gupchu kogut kaschik any Catholic in lasra Catholic is. Yene ya ko Catholic religion tsu ta ko laya dirasa din su temba yens. Man zambalin la ya religion mambu shuj dos tsama lo din politic resha lasra. Tsama politic resha sa. Ani ta ko la tiwachik yus. Kera ani kera dallama ki mirawas. Kera kali dallama ya chaya chigoro wasanga tindoji lasra kungal ani tanda kutam Bali lasra Bali marisa ani tanda manzo Indonesia da
Borobudur.
tichola pende ani nambi laga yakpu shodne dusa laga pe masu yakputne dus yena ya tukpa shujak dusa karasa didi theodika sanla
거기 사관들라 줘보셔.
사가 나눠 말다 디디 메주서 디 요롱 메주서 추고 쉬게 돼서
나서.
디 가르에서 그
제선데 달라마 칸데 저기도 쓰나 그냥 가르쳐기를 왜 야면아 디.
그냥 다치 달람 살이야 도그라 알라고 그
So Geshe visited the beach yesterday, was having an afternoon visit to the beach, and he was sitting somewhere looking at the ocean, and there was a guy that was approaching, and he was waving at Geshe from a distance and put his palms together, and Geshe waved for him to just come over and have a talk. So he approached and sat next to Geshe, and they were having a conversation. Geshe said, of course, his English is quite simple or basic, so he told that guy that he couldn't really have like an heart-to-heart, in-depth conversation. But anyway, the guy said that he comes from a Catholic background. All of his family, or most of his family, 99% of his family are Catholic, but he said that he left Catholicism. And he says that now looking at the situation around the world where there are so many problems and difficulties and divisions, including religions and so forth, they are mainly occurring due to politics. So he asked Geshe, well, you follow Buddhism, right? So your aim is to ascend the ranks of the Dalai Lama, to become the Dalai Lama yourself, right? So Geshe was kind of not really following this line of conversation, but this guy was saying that so many people around the world found themselves in complete turmoil, the conflicts and problems and difficulties. He said that he visited Indonesia and he visited Borobudur, that houses ancient temples, Buddhist temples. But the guy was saying that looking at the area around Borobudur, it seems that people are still quite torn apart in the sense that there's quite a lot of difficulties and problems and so forth. So why is it happening?
Religion said chuluk said tetsam kene chelaya chidang zingyo marwas ra tikanse nanga zuta chik pigi susu gi lamda luksu chik sugyun chik bu jig tolaya ani drosha ba imbayna ani chik susu sugyun di tsa chimbu chedaya mado ani shembala ya chik ani dunya da ani chik shemba ton chu lobye lenya di kal khabu chidi tsambala tene ranshin gi cholong tanda kona podi sewa nanshin gi chik ani religion tsamalo be ani chapsigre de shas bedi ani go naziro reshas ko o dillava di te chibu chikyan ro jiro dinza 당연히 갈상으로서나 지 아니 간줄라에 라간 지부 여바다 지 아니 꾼다 망부 여바다 대쌈기 아니 식 샘컴라야 팽금해바디 미큐마지기 때바이나야 디기 지 녀다다 디기 찌sol라야 녀다 가르쳐야메디 통대교라 다 된두기 찰라야 야시자다마 디리로지 다 인사라로 소딜레송스로 소딜레송스.
So His Honor the Dalai Lama, of course, speaks of religions in general, but just to say that problems arise because of religion is not enough. Actually, we need to go deeper into looking at why do different problems and complications arise. Well, we do sometimes hold to our own background with a strong sense of grasping to our cultural heritage, religious heritage, without actually going deeper into what they promote or what they preach, but rather just hold on strongly to our own cultural background, historical background, religious background, without allowing the mind to look at other traditions and other religions and wonder, what do we find? What can we find that is of benefit to us? What can we take from others that will benefit our mind? So if we close our mind to others' traditions, other religions, without thinking of what could be of benefit to me, indeed, such problems arise. So the problems are not ingrained with those traditions, with those religions. It's rather that our approach to them, in which sometimes becomes narrow-minded, and we block ourselves to look at others and see what could be of value. That is the source for problems. And as this guy was saying, that there are quite a lot of problems with politics and so forth, politics in religion. And indeed that happens when you see yourself as a follower of a certain tradition, but in your mind kind of you're too closed to look at others and see what's the value of others' traditions. So indeed, we see in this world, there are evident problems with this attitude around the world.
강안주 직 만소 규마직 라 피기게 직 원의 직 최고 돌아야 직 로종 강야 마싱의 만소 규마직에 피기 출루 남편주 요다디 아니 무고 임바직 아니 무고 임바디 베 원성도 통대바직 낭수 직 최직이 생기 남산지 최직이 생기 지금 학도도 더좁에 아니 바직 강고로 심하트바나 미규마직 통대 녀다디 아니 간주 베디 아니 직 녀다 임바지 토마트바나 다탑교 슈레도 아서라.
So for a certain person from the public, or in general, we can say from the general public, someone that is not educated about religion, and like Geshe was referring to this guy, if you're not really interested in religion, in spiritual tradition, we need to behave as religious practitioners in a way that will not present problems and difficulties and issues to such people. But often it is that because our mind is too narrow and we do create problems and difficulties, politics and so forth, that others notice that, even if they're not educated or informed about religion, our behavior and attitude is evident.
아니 롬바디 델야 지 아니 곰바다 아니 초덴다 아니 콘드라 소바 벨 롬바 코랑 베 당한즈데 레마르데 칸치 베 아니 롬바 코라 간디 주소르치키 임발야 남비로 남비 코슨 투dengi 롬바 코랑 간데바이냐 딜레 네비기 아니 무트소게 지 아니 출루도 출루 바랄야 아니 지 피게 직 투바쇼되게 와나 라도도 직 아니 남편줄이야 직 아니 투저다 직 아니 드소페 아니 할리 누가 메나야 하균한시 네 대바이나 아니 고선 투된 샹비 고된로디 아니 트마송스라 트마송스 닌저 코랑알이야 캐랑 갈상우도서 딜라 아니 이게 찌땅 점된 디게 먼저 남비게 아니 tempo chomden degi manzu tsama lo chikgyur yimba chik sonya mado chik dukse tindi keba chik lagu yo mare roch tangi dindro ji lawi insro kansana man samala yo goya de dewa imba da mugo dunga imba di chik ani ro mitsa ma imba nganzu dunla yo bi chachu busin yanche ni ani chik gyur imba chik son yo res ta chik gyur samlo di toni chik ro goya roch tangi ko kudar kanji kol de ratra ba de chons ko dipe yabu dusa tingone resa o dindri chik tinza nganzu ngone ge tachik lamram inare nanchu jami kabdula ya ani chik ngone ge nanchu nimbo kari badi injim jango yati ti jani sosu semgom gywa tango yata nanchu jami godin so derwas ro tipe kechembo roj tonsons.
So you might have beautiful opulent temples with lots of statues and stupas and so forth, all those things that for us represent the enlightened qualities of body, speech, and mind. They might be very expensive and extensive, but still, if inside the followers of those traditions, such tradition, like for example, the Buddhist tradition, if we have conflicts and tension and divisions and so forth, it's not really helping us. So it might be that our situation, when we have problems between one another, it might be that we do not make the situation worse, but we're also not improving it. We're still keeping up with some divisions, some conflict, some disagreements, and so forth. So if we cannot really improve our situation, if we cannot really recognize what we're doing, you might have lots of temples and statues and so forth, but at the end, they're not really helping you. So then what do we need to recognize? Well, first of all, as Buddhists, as Geshe was having a conversation with a person, he said, first of all, what we want to recognize based on the teachings of the Buddha, the Bhagavan, is that all of us are equal. And this is what the Buddha said. The Buddha spoke of the equality of all living beings, in that we're all equal in terms of wishing for happiness and wishing to not experience suffering. All of us are equal in that sense. Even birds, animals, even small insects have that same basic wish to be well and to be protected from suffering. So if you then use that as the core teachings to inform your attitude, and you build up on that, you're following in the you're doing the right thing, you're going in the right direction. So in that sense, you cannot say that there are some living beings that are better than others. You cannot say that there are some traditions or religions that are better than others. All of us are equal in terms of seeking happiness and wanting to avoid suffering. So as Geshe was having a conversation with the guy, the guy was really appreciating Geshe's approach to it. And Geshe thought that when you take it on to your personal practice or personal attitude, then first of all, you make sure that you study whatever the tradition that you might be following. First of all, you study. For example, here within Buddhism, we first of all study. We hone on the core essence of the Buddhist teachings, and then we train our mind in that.
Odere dinza kazi saming madre peshi kazi saming madre ya tanda ani chi Italy ge ta chi Jacob Shongrangi pile ya chi ani ngunzin ta chuluk samalo ya an chi ngunzin na ya do tindri ta chi nambi ge ani cheso sech Italy Jacob Shongi ani ngulen chin nambi sokba an di sobe na lo ya chi ani nganzo number sangi bi pigin nandeng ani chezo trukjure dan chi yorsek dos ra ti ge soba di ge ta ani jawrum chile ya ani kalu shu yondi kalab nalo ya jawrum ji karson sons laundi an nganzo chidan dizam mi samalo ani chele ya chesena ta chi bi gom gaya ya ani tonam pe an chigi yores ine mambu ji ki chi gom silaundi chi ta kaina ya manso nalo ya chi gom gom gi ming di shu tarche an pigile ya zo che de ri mamu shu yoras an jawrong ji di mangshu chi jian yila me chebi ro ani gom ki tola ya do de ti ani pigige kamalashla phela phya di thurub khazur thurub dumba geba o dindi kala ya kamalashla phela phebche ani che yila me chebi gom pengin ge ani ta jai hashang kembo di pido asra ngonetan pido da di tipe and tawa norgyor tawa logbar eslawchi ti gom chende mai reslawchi pido as o dindi sonda tenzang anzu gi kanji turup somba shiwa turup domba gebala ya ngone thane gi jagar gi pendu chog son shabi gi ani shilam desam namsha di tanganzu gomya ti yoras ro ti ngone thane nganzu gi pigila ya ani lojong cheni sujiklen tubayna tinti kala chongshabigi tadrub di ani chik turub kazus gyodrabayna ya turub gi jela ya leg mari sambigi tokpa tsawani ni mogowachik ra turub kazus gyodrana ya tinti gi tadrub di gonko yobajima do gonko mewaji kadu na chag mewanza ngandu janggoya zodi di ro 마도 간주치 간주 출루리 직셀라치 자치문지 샹그 출루래 통종 당대도 자원이는 노르교인 바치 안 딘디지까지 페브송스라 지진의 개념도 많이 고얘기를
On Tuesday, the Italian government recognized different traditions, different religions that exist in Italy, and apparently they had a ceremony where they invited guests or representatives from different traditions, and there were also those from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, right? So it was an official ceremony in Italy, and it turned out that there are more than 60 centers or groups in Italy following this tradition. So then, in looking at His Honour's advice for this meeting or issues pertaining to these meetings, he said that many people actually now in this world are interested in meditation, not only from the Buddhist perspective, but many people that follow spirituality, religions, and so forth. Many of them are interested in meditation, and meditation in some sense became a buzzword. But then the idea that many people have about meditation is that you need to sit in a certain rigid position, you need to sit cross-legged, you need to stop any mental operation going on, you need to think of nothing, and that would constitute a meditation. So many people think that this is what it means to meditate. But then when you look at Tibetan history, around the 7th or 8th century, an Indian master called Kamalashila traveled from India to Tibet and participated in a debate that is called Samya debate that determined the type of Buddhism or Buddhist approach that would become prevalent in Tibet. So the two views that were contexted or juxtaposed in that event were either a form of meditation in which you think of nothing, there is no mental operation going on, or a meditation that is based on understanding the basis, the paths, and the results, and using that in order to inform your meditation. So at the end, Kamalashila's approach won, the one that was propounding that form of meditation. The guy was a Chinese monk. He lost the debate, and therefore kind of he had to leave. And the attitude to meditation that was adopted in Tibet at that time, and it's still current, even after the passage of so many centuries, is a meditation that is informed by understanding the basis, the paths, and the results. So this form of meditation in which, first of all, you learn, you then study, and then you meditate on the presentation of the basis, the paths, and the result hasn't changed in the through the passage of time. It is still current and is still relevant to our way of meditating. So this is something that we still need to do. So we don't need to kind of look for meditations in which we empty our mind of all thoughts and just suffice with that, but we do need to look into ways of transforming our mind through developing an understanding of the basis, the paths, and the results. So the base, yeah, the basis, the paths, and the results. Shalom Dragosum.
Yeah. 어디리 dinza 당이게 셰데바로 가르스나 간주기 냠닌 치사기 시피기게 아니 상기비기 추고 따루 야부쇼식 여데바 디 소수기 제바 야부체니 수직 아니 레 마투바이나 아니 콜록지기 토니 제바 잡데바이나 테니 추균 징인 속이 아니 추드 쪼바소야 아니 민망부쇼지 추들에 마가와 간선의 추드 통구요 말이 추균 징인기 밀었대니 아니 추들이야 마가비 로케 추바이나 아니 싸와니니 되는 따다 대어 말았어. 진짜 더 이지미지 가지고 간지 추출 상부디 약부디 로 오늘 단위기 간지 잠빌링기 밀이야 카요라요 펜도이비 추줄디 인지미니 장고도스 로 인지미니 장고도스 장니 시니 라렌라터 시니 밀라시 로 시니 소수 곰바이나 디니 당 오늘 단 잠블리야 펜도치 투야치 용구여서레스로.
So particularly here, when we consider our involvement with the Buddha Dhamma, if we cannot make ourselves study in a sense that investigate and get to the essential points, get at the essential points that the Buddha taught, it could be that we use our rough or basic understanding to develop misconceptions about the Buddhist tradition, to develop wrong views. And as such, our wrong views or wrong understandings about how to practice our traditions will create disharmony and animosity between people. And as such, this is definitely not the intention of the great beings that have practiced this tradition. So if we do find that we are actually in our attitude bringing animosity between people, that we're creating conflicts between people, this is definitely an indication that we're not proceeding in the right way. So what we do need to do is, first of all, to become informed, to study. Then whatever we study, we train ourselves in those points. We meditate and train ourselves in what we study. And then comes a time in which we could teach it to others, and we could also benefit others with those things. But first of all, we need to study those things and then to train ourselves, to train our mind.
Tere dinza nganzu chuge ta namba sanji bi chui nanda chuluk shamba nanda ta mang chege chuge labja yongya gi shiza zu di deva deva da dungam deva junzen de chen ta ran lagdo ta namba sanji bi chuge bi labja yongya gi shiza di ani draw to soja yodo joge samgam la ya deva deva da dungam deva yoba di junzen de chen deva dribi tabda dunga sebi gi tabjila ya 아니 추글랍자디 괜찮아요. 딘디지임바디 야치야다 말아왔어. 디치디 다 여름지 뒤다도 손대. 단단 간주 들음 유사치고는 레바이나야. 아니 지 참말로 지거래다. 대원대버도 동감면 되면 바시긴바. 아니 비기 대비 차기행기 지 벤줄로 소버디 당간 잠블리나몰라 샤반 여름들이 숨고도 쓰러. 잠블리나 샤바이나 찌당 벤줄기 강아여바. 소비 강아여바. 망부여다 야차 거바이나 패시 야차 망디 벤주기 페나타 진노쇼 롬바도이나 더 망치야 벤주기 톨이야 쇼지기 강아스케 요마로스 다 이네야 강아 간 제거스라운디 강아디 비기게 산주기 만담 간지 아니 강아 티기 요바디 야샤 야다 마로스 란게 셴파미야기 삼로 디슈 셴보 레온디 아니 지 비기 따치 샴페인 그 삼로 남베나로 손데 야럽 산주기 간지 아니 티기 산주기 당가 메바디 아니 세부 슈차고 다 산주 콤벌 땅야기 시자디 Sawa di ama di kawyers lana sanji chomden di labshan yoba di sewu shujires. Tensa nganzu jinju tsug labsha di nana yobin zambali na pendo yobin labsha di sosu gi pigi gi sakje darsum jigo ni jangchi di mela pa treba na ta pendo nyakchi gimba di rwa o tindishik sungudo as rwa.
So then approaching that from the point of view of the Dharma, we recognize that all of us want to be happy and no sentient beings want to suffer. From a Buddhist perspective, we recognize that all living beings from the 6 realms of existence are equal in seeking happiness and well-being and wanting to avoid suffering and pain. Not only that, we're trying to apply methods and techniques in order to cultivate the happiness and well-being that we seek and to remove the suffering and pain that we do not wish for. So then from the point of view of the Buddha Dharma, we look at we study and try to develop the methods that can bring happiness and well-being and to avoid suffering and pain with respect not only to ourselves, but with respect to all living beings. So then Izone says that looking at the day and age that we live at the moment, the 21st century, it is still a valid observation to be made that we're still operating on the basis of seeking happiness and well-being and wishing to avoid suffering and pain. And we're still, to a great degree, we're still bereft of what we seek. Even those of us who live in developed countries in which we experience or enjoy a great degree of affluence, more money, more wealth, and so forth, we can say that probably you could say that majority of people in our traditions are not in our countries are not bereft of necessities. Of course, there are different degrees of wealth, but you can say that most of us are doing all right. But still, it seems that there are problems and difficulties in terms of seeking happiness and well-being and wanting to avoid suffering and pain. So it is still our share, despite enjoying a greater degree of physical prosperity. So that being the case, then it is indicative or clear that wealth alone or money alone cannot bring happiness and well-being or to remove suffering and pain. So what is insufficient often is an attitude in which we seek our own victory, even if it comes at the expense of others. So we're trying to achieve something, to attain something, and often it comes at the expense of others. That makes it difficult for us to develop a wholesome practice of recognizing the equality between all living beings. So these are the trainings that we need to take up from the Buddhist perspective. Those training that first of all need to be investigated, like you would investigate a nugget of gold. You will melt it in fire. You would rub it, or you would try to cut it into pieces in order to make sure that the piece of gold that you have is an authentic piece of gold. So similarly, we want to take up those trainings for developing a greater degree of mental happiness and well-being, but we do that in having analyzed and investigated those trainings and verify that they're valid for us.
Ani number sanji chu nimbu di ani shilam de song nam jan za shingu bin ne zu lam de vision ban de ku sa di ta shingu bin ne zu xiang di ani demba shi demba ni la so ba ta di zu chagoras ta demba shi xiang di demba shi gi la ya ke ju shi shi chu du den shi ma da su chu du sa gi ani ma da bin ne zu ti ta ngan zu lamram gu sa je le ya di ani chi chi ma da ba sam ba se de le ris ra ka jing ma di.
So we mentioned the need to develop an understanding of our views on the basis of the presentation of the basis, the path, and the results. So the bases are the 2 truths, the 2 truths or the 4 truths. The path are the paths that integrate method and wisdom, and the results are the 2 bodies of Buddha. But then we begin with the basis. And in relation to the basis, we have an understanding of the 2 truths or the 4 truths. Now, with respect to the 4 truths, the Buddha taught the 4 truths in highlighting the 16 aspects of the 4 truths, such as impermanence. So we begin with true suffering. True suffering, each one of the truths has 4 aspects. So the first truth, true suffering, has 4 aspects. The first aspect is impermanence, and we then link it up to the point that we are looking at now in the text, which explains the meditation on death and impermanence. So we do that in order to understand better true suffering. So let's look at the topic of the meditation on death and impermanence.
어디리 된자 간다 치워마다 비코르니마 카지 니 칸라칸즘 만 드로여스 단다 준비치는 만 드로고 잠발라 아니 치워마다 비코르 셰야 조디 비라야치 멜라야 남다 롱야 소르지다치 징나 롱야 소르치 간지 셈라야 심바기에 쳇도 마힘바 로 응원네 단니기 식무빈네 술디 아니 네루 칸다치 톨레 네유메 디 제바 제당 톨레 송구 여버디 간중 원전 치투고도 따라 무빈네 술야치 네루라야 타라 마부쇼치 다로 타시 타바 시원디 아니 치 비기 로이 딱점 세티 유랑근 마드바 비기 또비 딱점 토네 아니 지 추남기기 아니 남자 체주디 다 네루 타시 타와드레스 다 딜레츠 라바 시원디로 아니 치 깨치기는 교도돼야지 아니 메타베네스디 간진 두시기 추기 네루 라바지 토네 아니 sometimes 디렌도 아스로 팀직 네루 라바 딩문진 치마도나 델레 타르투베 네루 타모디 문진 치도야 페마스바 카부 딩문진 치마도나 아니 마리바세디 세 카부 마리바세 마도나 마리비왕기 아니 차단기 디왕기 렌다마데사니 둥하 존수가 람바디 자와니네 도토메바치 차가원자 안 산이 좀 되게 통문이 네루 라바니 친 네루 타메 버드 네루 모트 네루 모 시비 롤레테니 테니 아니 잠지 검주가 람바디 송도 왔으라.
So we have covered a few points with respect to the meditation on death and impermanence, but let's just remind ourselves that first of all, the point in meditating on death and impermanence is not in order to instill fear in our heart. It's not that we want to become terrorized by death. That's not the goal. It is also not to become discouraged or depressed about our upcoming death. That's not the point in meditating on death and impermanence. The point in doing that is in order to recognize reality, to see reality the way that it is. And there are different levels to reality, different subtleties, different levels of subtleties to reality. The most subtle level of reality, according to the Buddhist tradition, is understanding that things exist as merely being imputed independence upon others. So to understand phenomena as being merely imputed contingently is the most subtle level of reality. But in order to understand that, we first of all need to understand cause levels of reality. If we don't understand cause levels of reality, we're not going to be able to develop an insight into subtle levels of reality. So when we begin with cause levels of reality, we begin with understanding the reality of impermanence. Now, if you're not going to develop an understanding of that, we're not going to be able to overcome ignorance. So there is a process by which, because of ignorance, disturbing emotions arise, anger, attachment, and so forth. It causes us to perform actions that result in suffering. If we're not going to be able to overcome this ignorance, we're not going to be able to overcome suffering. And in order to overcome ignorance, we need to develop an insight into reality. We need to develop an insight into subtle reality. But before we do that, we need to understand cause levels of reality, beginning with the reality of impermanence.
어디리다 디즈다 카징기 참디 간주기 칙 타마딜이야 개딱예 송들 세미미 네버만스 이번세 디칸들이야 라마움 트롤소번 세탈 마침바 로르든 친난기 kinki shivanam yigla chelas dajan tedawi chujeno nyamdu yaya samo set chevamatabo gomtsuki da chochik ra and digi dichik songodo asra.
So we're going to go back to the text and pick up from the point that we left off in a previous session. So we have looked at, so we're looking at the 9-point death meditation, the 3 roots and the 9 arguments. We started to cover the second root argument, which says that the time of death is uncertain. So looking at the end of this paragraph, we've read through that in the previous session, but let's do that again. It says you should take to heart the fact that your gurus or friends and so forth have died through sudden internal or external conditions for death before reaching the end of their lives, and you should think over and over again, I too have similar qualities.
Terida ding anzugi pigi dachi rangi lamas nata kechishu di chagoras di thomika binere dachi ani segi mesegi thokbot senada yampi meset ani nyam di kingi da zula ya zichinro kathada mebado zide tzo be ani setar machin lower di chiging lam drojang be mambu yungoras da dinti kawlaya lama chebe soana chilla kantu gomlo jo soana shingi and ditso imbayna ya tagarangi da ani chi ngaya soso ya ani tachi ditawchin rogora samsongi samlo diletugores kezi dilebayna and dinti chilebayna chi da kevan dishani kewa chimalaya rogoya samlo chi yobayna ani 펜도 연구레스 가리 펜도 연구레스라디 깨워 치마라야 로야기 다딕지엘 펜도 연구레스 로 깨워 치마라야 로야기 다딕지온디 랑싱기 아니 랑게 셴뱀기 삼로디 까니 아니 세워 미비 삼바질이야 네버드 땡고도스 세워 미비 삼바질이야 네버드 땡바이나 랑싱 이가기 데발이야 펜바치 로 도수페 마스바디니 다 담가서는 딜라지 원에치는 매교로 제도스라 이난 아주 치들로온디 딘딜라고도 삼삼도지 샤는 드로샤바나 디톨에 삼루치야마다 제버치야마치바나 딘디지레 디삼 땅바이나 삼루페 망부 땅이요 로
It says here you should take to heart the fact that your gurus, your lamas, your friends and so forth have died through sudden internal or external conditions. So when we think of the lamas, the gurus that we have, which are very close to our heart, in some sense, you can say that they're the closest that we have to our heart. And our friends, at some point, our friends, our close ones, seem to be inseparable from us. We cannot even imagine that one day we will have to live apart from them. But then when we go through the motions in life, we see that some of them died unexpectedly due to internal or external conditions. And just as the Guru Puja says, one day, it says that whatever you encounter, apply to your meditation. So when we see that happening to one of our gurus, one of our friends, we should then apply to our own situation and think that one day it will happen to me. And when you think that one day it will happen to me, then you think that there will come a day in which I will have to depart from this life and continue on to the next life. And when you think about it like that, and you start thinking of making preparation for this day, for this upcoming day. And the more you think about it, the more you're capable of putting a stop to an attitude that is always seeking your own victory, even if it comes at the expense of others, or defeating others. When you think of your upcoming death, that you will have to depart at some stage from this life and go on to the next, you start to behave in a way that is harmless. You're not abstaining from harming others, and behave in a way that contributes to the happiness and well-being of yourself and other living beings as well. As such, it becomes the best instruction that you can have with respect to the way that you behave or conduct your affairs in this life. So we often say the words, but we don't think of the meaning. So we think of death and impermanence, the uncertainty of the time of death and so forth. That there are many conditions contributing to death and so few conditions that keep us alive and so forth. And often we don't use it enough to really inspire our heart. But when we go deeper than just saying the words, when we start to think of the implications and use different reasons and logics, then we find that we can use that in order to transform the attitude that we have to different affairs of this life.
데르딘자다 먼저 남비 쇼나라 송대야기라 잠블린 디나라라 야치 아니 퐁야 니 독슈디 아니 산주고 폰데기 여바디 아 직송 아니 산주 다 랭고야 산주 콤팔드 땅고야기 내가 직송 아니 산주 콤팔 땅야기 탑럼디 비기 싱무빈 내출 아니 지금 라트비토네 아니 산주 콤판 땅야기 아니 탑럼 송샤야디 단 내가 쉬우치기로 비기 싱무빈 내출데 뛰니 싱무빈 내출 그런 것도 뛰니 대단 튠비기 산주라단지 송거라스 싱무빈 내출데 민튠비기 산주 제거스 라바이나 자원이니 용태 매겨지러 왔어 이제 탑럼도 집어 땡샤바 텔이야 안간주 라렌 따나 아니 춤리 튕겨래 라레 마르다나 춤리 튕겨 마르다 디차된 도스로 덴자 넘어서니 좀 된디기 아니 계랑 라로 요새 디라다 아니 타바토도 모두 소수 라발이 요레스 니 계랑 타빌 람 땡샤 요스 베디 아니 송게 쇼고야 조지디 아니 간주 장인 중에 야부지 마찬가지자 아니 때문에 좀 된디는 송게 쇼고라스로
송게 쇼선데
가서다 의를 투치
오케이 So looking at the advice of the Buddha Dhamma, it says, in essence, we can say that in this world, what we need to rid ourselves of is an attitude or a behavior that is not wholesome. What we need to take up is a wholesome behavior or wholesome practice. In order to do that, we develop an understanding of the basis, the paths, and the results. The basis basically is an understanding of the way that exists, the way that things exist at the very basis. We develop an insight into reality, the way that things exist, and we use it in order to develop the paths of method and wisdom to transform our mind. Just as the Buddha said, I've shown you the path that leads to liberation. Now liberation depends upon you. So when the Buddha said, I've shown you the path to liberation, now liberation depends upon you, he said, well, I taught how things exist at the very basis. Now you need to develop an understanding of the way that things exist at the very basis. So you need to develop an understanding and then you use that in order to transform your own mind. So liberation then depends upon you. But often rather than doing that, we break up in despair.
어디래 디자 다 베나 양안주기 사진이바디 아니 치긴 신도 만신 생긴 용어셋 난주 아니 친등이 러 수제요 말았다 비기지 아니 속 손등이 좀 속도 짜치면 증인지마도 속 밤에도 땅 통인지 다 아니 샘가 마데바 차나 샘가 마데바 차고 내주 로가지마도 오늘 잔내기지 아니 샘감 대우지기 미지바나 속 찌르미징에 수제요 말았어 이나야 딘디기 속 될이야 never mambu슈치 속 소야려야 비기기 아주 두스 지 미기 통야 암조 거야 지 류그래야 샘나 삼야기 추 참을러야 파지 때바나 아니 속 소야기 견는 저거도 속 쇼야기 견는 저거도 지 야자다 도바나 야자 만슈드 속 쇼야기 견려야 레데 유로치 어딘디 차요레스 디송고도 아스라.
So just to remind yourself of the outline of the second root point in the meditation on death and impermanence. The second root point is the uncertainty of the time of death. Right? The time of death is uncertain. So we've covered point A that says that there is no certainty with regards to lifespan in Jambudvipa or this world, which is why the time of death is uncertain. The second point, which we will pick up from today, says that there are many conditions that lead to death and few conditions that promote life. So most of us, if not all of us, are holding strongly to our life. We're refusing to give up on our life. Of course, in certain situations, people experience certain situations which causes the mental strength to decline. But most people, you could say, are holding strongly to the life without wishing to give it away. But still, as Lama Tsongkhapa points out here, there are many conditions that lead to death and few conditions that promote life. So then when we start to look at the things that we come in contact with daily, either, when we think of object of the senses, the things that we hear, the things that we taste, the things that we smell, the things that we sense with our body consciousness, our tactile consciousness, the things that we see with our eyes and so forth, you can see how so many of those things, so many of those objects of the senses, rather than promoting life, they act as conditions for death. They could act as conditions for death. So in that sense, you can then recognize how there are so many conditions that contribute to death and so few conditions promoting life.
Tilda, that didn't that so such a mushuchi, so such a mushuchi, any on samalogi, zingi yordania, that yam sembusorogilia, pena nambi shongna yumaya, and tomacham dindi, jinju gitumda mawa shing bayanaya, so ngunzandandi, any chigurchik yomaris. Sok di sok singing dirida sagi, Tsultrim zindia so deres sagi, ngun zintanchi, chigurji, chomandas dara. The Nanshin gita tendu gipe, Turum Nusaji gita chik metsamagi, any Kera Jandia pen, Seriba imbayana, not tep chick or tep dindizanolaya, Seriba imbayana, so di derisagi, pe any chijon soraj, chimugi ma, any kelenche tuyaji, any temple chon to your mares. Or dindij tishas ro ta kanji dindijilaya ani inaya ani chik sok di lamna sachembu shoji zangi yorda inaya sok kandi imadi ngo manzamadi yam sembu rajmunde sra yam sembu dasra.
Life is so precious to us. We hold on to our life so strongly. But then one interesting point, one really really interesting incredible point is that while we hold on to life so strongly, we find it difficult to agree between ourselves with respect to what is the definition of life. So not only from the point of view of spirituality in general, but even when you look at the Buddhist tradition, there are 4 major schools of thought, philosophies. And when you look at the way that they explain what life is, what is the meaning of life, not like what is the meaning of life in that existential thing, but just what is the meaning of life also, and so forth. There is no common agreement between different schools of thought within Buddhist philosophy. And also, then if you take it to the science realm and try to find a common agreement, something that everyone will agree with respect to what life is, also there it's difficult to come down on a common agreement. So it's quite interesting in that all of us are holding so strongly to our life, but still in terms of understanding what life means, that's quite difficult.
Odiri dezata pegita nambigi ta tartu na rojre tumta tartu ta pena chik tartu ondi pena ta gu gyawadoji chang sombi ta gu la ya konto ondi gu nalo ya ani chik sok di ani long jila ya ro pigi nganzu long yo wi chaji gora yo long la ya ani rig mambu chechini ani sok long saj kanji sok sengende long la ya shayores long jila ya long chashi jila ya tian long di kandaj res la ondi nganzu ji ani lu la ya ji cheda ani namshi shuyagi ani tenching long jila ya ani sok shagdos ro
namshi shuesana sogola namshi
manzu lula namshi shuyora namshi the true tenching long jila ya sok sigdos
진짜 롱 가서 속단 소진기 롱디 치퍼베
sok zing long tichibado shagdo
no when you look at Buddhist writings, as Geshe said, when you look at different schools of thought within Buddhist philosophy, it's hard to find a common agreement to what life is. But then when you look at it from a tantric perspective, in the writing of the Tantra of Vajradhara, there is a discussion of life in relation to the life-bearing wind. So in honing down or coming down of what life is from the Tantra of Vajradhara, amongst the different wind energies that operate in our life, it refers to the life-bearing wind, right? So there are major winds. I think that there are 5 major winds, and one of them is called the life-bearing wind. Now, wind is explained in Tantra as that which is moving. So the movement of wind, and particularly here, that wind energy that is called the life-bearing wind is that which has a certain function within the body. It is connected with heat or warmth in the body, but also that which allows the consciousness to remain within the body, to abide or to remain within the body. So this is the life-bearing wind, right? So it has, so in terms of explaining what life is from the point of view of this Tantra, it is said that it is the wind energy responsible for warmth in the body, but also for the abiding or remaining of consciousness within the body.
Dire dichidigi Geshe jatamba nganzu ta ludi chidang ludi gi ani chik sok soyagi chaginji da chashi sorachi kanji lugi ani sok di lug chashi jinza sok di lula tengi yobadi da sewu chagores ro dichidigi ani sok di ani long res la da long ro long di ani pigi semdal ani chik ani long nimbu di ani chigro chigle teni rogu yobachik nambi shongnan tatdo di dindi songo dos da dindi long dia ani lula ya tensa lu zo di lu zala ya tende achik ro long di lu zala ya tenge yoba tensa nganzu lu pigi ge pami kudali tribi lula ya tembi ki zajila ya teni long yungu yoba long la teni so yungu yoba o dindi chawandi ani pami kudali tribi lu koran takba tembo zawani ni megyo chawanza ani so di takba tembo megyo chawadi ranging trivia doji tensa nganzu 지 냠len 통부 걸려야지 하 라미기 비기 다 냠len 난다 리치려야 비기 루트단디 아니 지 파마니 줄람비 르마힘바 아니 랑기 비기 아니 셈 급dob지기 아니 루치 트단지 송요레스 딘디 루디 아니 렌투바이나 아니 소토르 모고야지 세피 모고야지 야자자다마다 딘디치 송고르다 디즈페 마스바테니 ting sabu shuchik ra redos da dinti ki ting sabu nyamle yongya la ya ani lamram lojong di metame yimbachi lamram lojong nimbo di ani chiktawa ani tombani tobi sherab dam tab chanju sem da nyinji da chanju sem da so dinti ki lojong yagbuji meba ina rangi sem tone pigi lu sabaji drup sedi sawani ni yonta mebaji redos tinza da ganji number sanji bi che 타투바 산기 군 등인지기 람룸 로종 냠len디 메타메 차고한자 계시부 슈송데데 델투기 샤스
So then looking at the body, which hosts this life-bearing wind, in some sense, you can say that this life-bearing wind is part of the body. So we have the life-bearing wind, which is responsible for the warmth and the remaining of consciousness within the body. And then the body itself, and they exist in codependency. One depends upon another. So then when we look at how the life-bearing wind depends upon the body, within the body, we also have a system of channels. This is to say energy channels, and the wind elements, this wind energy is something that moves or travels along those energy channels. One of them is the life-bearing wind. So then looking at the body itself, well, the body developed from, first of all, the meeting of sperm and ovum that came to us from a father and mother. Since those substances contributed to the evolution of the body, we can then, first of all, recognize that as such, since those substances that came from a father and mother are not something that are stable, enduring, that are reliable and so forth, the body that develops or emerges from them is also not something that is stable, permanent, enduring, and so forth. And therefore, the wind or the life-bearing wind that depends upon the body is also not as such. If it depends upon the basis that is not stable, also it in itself will not become stable. So then there will come a time in which this body will be relinquished or will die, basically. So then the consciousness will depart from this body. So there is a way from a Buddhist perspective to then train your mind along the steps of the path to enlightenment in a very deep and profound way. So this topic is really deep and profound, really subtle. So there's a way of developing your mind along the steps of the path to enlightenment in which you integrate both method and wisdom. The method that you integrate is the method of loving kindness and compassion, bodhicitta, and the wisdom is the wisdom that realizes emptiness. So if we're able to train our mind well with this combination of body and mind, so with this combination of method and wisdom, we'd be able to get to the point in which, through the power of the mind, we'd be able to take up a body, which is called a mental body, right? A body that was facilitated through the power of mind, that is not subject, a body that is not unstable, that is not controlled by others. And therefore, if we take such a body due to the power of mind, it will not be subject to death and so forth. It will not have to be given up involuntarily, because it will be a body that is established by the power of the mind. And through that, we'll be able to accomplish a Buddha's body. But if we do not train ourselves well in the steps of the path in which we develop such methods and wisdom, we'll not be able to attain such a Buddha body.
There is the Nimangi Machi Loshawas Ranga the Nimanchila, Nibani, so de la Semi never mandi, the Dar Mida, Mamayimba, Denri Servatan, Dengri Servatan, Tundri, Lusola, never to me, Tsultrim, Tejan to Nanki, Nedan, Chi Joanamki, Nutsul, ship to Samo. Shenya Rangi Lu Joan Shili Trugola. Teda Jan Penzu Chikila never chibi. Jomi come Chamanyamba Pedrix to Gurna, Neke de So Tobi, Teda ne Randa Hinki Suyebi, Luso Takten Tanando Tar Nayas, Takten Tar Naya, Yigde Mede. Danchimli Chivin Dushini, Son the Tagdu Jadama, to me, Gordi, Keji Riri, Number Chiji, Pever Jebane. Kayamedo, Sheda Rinjan Tramaleka, Chida Gengi Naneba, Lomar Nandu Marmeshi Sheso, Shaya Somba Ni Chivitendo, Shuba Yimbe, Sungen Manya, Tela Yigdem Rondi, Rinjan Tramale, Chiviken Mawan Disumba in the Nonsechi, Teda Namjan Chivia, David Tau to Chunzo Ji Jesonsos.
So let's read through point B that says there are many conditions that lead to death and few conditions that promote life. It says there are many harmful influences, animate as well as inanimate, on this life. So you should thoroughly consider how it is threatened by human beings and non-human evil spirits, how there are types of animals that endanger one's body and life through manifold harm, and likewise how both internal illnesses and external elements cause harm. Furthermore, since your body is necessarily formed from the four elements and they also harm each other, if their domains expand or diminish out of balance, they will cause illnesses and deprive you of your life. Since they exist simultaneous with you, even though your body and life appear to be stable, they cannot be relied on. In the Great Fun and Nirvana Sutra, it says, the notion of death is that this life, constantly surrounded by hostile enemies, deteriorates in each moment, and there is nothing that increases it. Also in Nagarjuna's Precious Garland, it says, we live amid the conditions for yama, like battle lamp in a gale. Apart from that, life itself is involved in the reality of death, so that many conditions for life are unreliable. Again, from the Precious Garland, it says, there are many conditions for death. Those for living are only few. Even they may well be deadly. Therefore, always practice the Dharma.
어디를 딘자 당안줄이야 지 사치슈도 소리 아니 속티 만치야기 다지 맨다 마스나 약슈디 아니 최치야로 렌도다 맹기 비라 맨라 리망부야 나시 맨 카지디 베 아니 숙자기 맨 소로치로 다 아니 타말야 숙자 맨 숙치치치 따니 타마들야 아니 시야기 숙자 맨마도 아니 페약 숙자 맨 지어 말았다 간주로 딘자 아니 치 피기 또그 땀섬디 수작 맹 소르지마도 온데 단이기 소소라야 직 동화숨기 날비기 직 나사 생란로야기 아니 맨직 제모도스 로맨 약슈디 아니 피기 잠년지 잔주 쌤다 동반이 더비 세럽을 소바 냠낸 체체니 아니 피타 상아도지 테빌람의 슈니 아니 간지 장기 비기 아니 셴리야 먹고 루트리아티 티레도스라.
So the most important thing for life is our own life force. So in order to then sustain it, we practice the Dharma. It's in a way that is similar to saying that there are different types of medicine. You can say that maybe the least type of medicine is a pain, medicine for, a pain-killing medicine, painkillers. But then when you start taking painkillers, at some point, if you overdose on that, that can be quite detrimental. So you need to go into something that is deeper or better. So similarly, when we look at the way that we deal with different affairs of this life, so we often pursue or chase after food and clothing and social interactions and social ranks and so forth. But these are like painkillers. They dull some level of pain, but really if you want to go deeper, you need to then train your mind with the best medicine, which is the development of loving kindness and compassion, bodhicitta, wisdom that realizes reality, the wisdom that realizes emptiness. And then you take even a step further and you enter into the path of the Vajrayana, the system of the secret mantra path, in order to develop your own mind to its fullest extent. That would be the best medicine.
If that's somebody sajid did that, Lucian the Nyam Chong, Namching him as said. Lucian the Nyam Chong in body, Nanzu Ludi, Pig, Daji Chulia, Pugzemozesaki Chulia, and a Pugyawandi, Boa, and a bold in the Tanguras, that the dig dojina took some in dirt edge, or Nanzu saw the and a Sodi and Ludi that Dindi Sorach, Luletembi Sodi, Dindi Sorach, but do church in the Yobandoch or bed Dindle Jagdosra.
Let's look at the next point in our text. Now, the third point in the meditation of the uncertainty of the time of death says that the body is extremely vulnerable and the time of death, therefore, is uncertain. So looking at how fragile this body is, it says this body is as vulnerable as a water bubble. That for a child, it might be something to play with, but it can easily burst. It's enough for something slight to touch upon it or to rub against it, and this water bubble is completely destroyed. And the body is similar to that. The body is as fragile as a water bubble. Therefore, this and that, such as thorn piercing it, may be to blame and destroy life without the need for major harm.
Sumbanis Lu Chu Otar Shindu Nyamchong, never Chimo Mugubar, Serma Supata Rija, Nindo Chene, Son Jibana, Chigin Tamji, never shum Bayan, Shindu Hadi, Shidrile, Sadalombo Jamsu Nimadum Baris, Segbi Lucian, the Daja, Tawayan, Lubermingan, Shindu Nyamchom, and Huge Celsius. Tedder Sambi, Tarchidak Lu Sok Nam, Lusok Nam Jum, ngeba mebe long yu mijawa tada nini chue jawa tau chubi ane shendam mandu chadi shir zakata mitri sada chedar yambi lu neme gume de neba tenye zena nimbola namchi kubi jigmi gi khansi nagi gusona tenya tesi chingir chishi sombatar zawsungi nani ka chishu namchi ngeme samban dinye yimbi bebar chawos.
So in reading through the section that explains how fragile the body is, it says again, therefore this and that, such as thorn piercing, may be to blame and destroy life without the need for major harm. Thus, it is very easily overcome by all conditions for death. In Nagarjuna's letter to a friend, it says, if physical things, the ground, Mount Meru, and oceans are burnt up by the 7 blazing suns, and even ashes are not left behind, what need to mention exceedingly feeble humans? So then, having explained this second point, Lama Tsongkhapa explains the decision that you draw from now on, which is the need to practice the Dhamma. It says, after thoughts like this, you should reiterate many times the innermost decision to practice the Dhamma from this very moment, for it is uncertain when your body and life will be overcome by the Lord of death, and you should not assume that there is still time. As Sri Jagamitra says, Earthlord, as long as this borrowed body abides in pleasure, not ill, not decayed, in that time a frame takes its essence, fearless of illness, death, decay. In times of illness, old age, and decay, you may be overcome, but what is the use? And then it says amongst the 3 root thoughts which we employ to our meditation on death and impermanence, the second point, which is the thought about the uncertainty of the time of death, is the most important, which is why you should put effort into it. Serena? Yeah. So the last thing that Lama Tsongkhapa said, let's look at that. You mean in relation to this or before that? Or this one? Yeah. All right. So Serena's question for the people at home and also for the people here is saying that for it is uncertain when your body and life will be overcome by the Lord of death, and you should not assume that there is still time. So if you do not assume that there's still time, how do you then think, speak, and act in thinking that in your daily life? Dila Jerimpochegi Karisumbaresena Dila Deda Sambe Tar Chiragi Losonam Jong Neba Mebe Long Yumi Jawa Sashdoa. Shri Jagamitra Nguna. Shri Jagamitra Nguna Dinguna.
Yeah.
Long Yumi Jawa Tandani ne Shu Jawa Sashdoa. Chazan long Yumi Jawa Sayadi. Natso Mitze Reriang Kande Chik Samgore Kecha Shegogre Jawa Chegogre Chilong Kasa Chilong Meba Chilong Mi Jawa Sashdoa.
Long Yuma Jawa.
Long Yumi Jawa. Long Yumi Jawa Sayadi Mitze Natso Mitze Nima Reriang Kande Chik Chegogres. Kare Samba, Kare Jeva, Kare Sheva. Long Yumi Jawa.
Chezada nganju sem nanglo ya chik and teri shigmare sani shigmare samsam roji mado and teri gonda kharchion sani kharchion samsam gi choadi 먼저 지단 시고리 삼성으로 주여바이냐 가진이는 지금 로열다 시고리 삼성으로 주여바이냐 대리 시그리 삼성이 초디어 말와서 대리 미시 삼성 상이의 심모용 삼성 로 딘디 징알 대기도스 디로 디게 견자고도 디 삼잉 뭐도스 데송거스라
So often what we do in our life is we go about our life and not thinking that I will die today or will die tomorrow. Not only that, we think that I will not die today and I will not die tomorrow. So often when we, even if we don't think about it that forcefully, we still have that attitude in which we believe that we will not die today or we will not die tomorrow. And we come up with plans with respect to what we need to do, given that we're not going to die today and tomorrow. So one thing that we need to do is to not listen to that way of thinking. Even though our mind tells us that I'm not going to live, I'm not going to die today, I'm not going to die tomorrow, don't listen to that.
There this somebody's right. That 지금 산이 미치 삼성, 대리 미치 삼성 그 삼로 디기 원도 전에 릉학 자발을 주원디 지금 대리랑 대학 제도 산이 대학 제도 간지 친 디라야마도 아니 개와 처말이야 삼당 마투야지 차르고 열어왔어. 그래서 대디기 간줄이야 팽기를 누구를 누구여 봐지 누구여만 다 삼로 갔다는 걸 쓰라바나 개와 데니 개와 치말라인 로고 탁추 임바인자 안 디기 차디디 개와 딜이야 치고거레스 개지 산인 로기여 바이나 로고에 짐바이나 대린 차디 치고거레스 그래서 아니 대리 미치 삼비 로디기 차디 치엘 누구간자 소소 내가 가르쳐 봤는 단지 노르디반 소소 내가 가르쳐 봤느냐 아니 첸 디다 치마니까야 펜토투야기 삼로 땅고 그랬어 가드나 걔는 니마직 대와는 니마직 될이야 아니 첸데도 치마니까야 펜비기 아니 자와 가르도 디톨에 삼단 디톨에 레가지는 로투바이나 아니 걔는 데나 펜그리 드라나야 디펜그리스 같이 디치고레스 추지세디 디레스로.
So then when we think of this attitude in which we think that I will not die today and I will not die tomorrow, this type of attitude is making us focus only on affairs that belong to this lifetime only. Because we believe that it's not going to happen today or tomorrow, we become solely focused on things that are only relevant to this life. We don't focus on what will occur to us in future lifetimes. So is this helping us or is it harming us? Well, this attitude in which we focus only on this life and not think of future life is not helpful. It's actually a harmful attitude. So we recognize that death will certainly happen. So we stop listening to that attitude in which tells us that it's not going to happen today or it's not going to happen tomorrow. So if we think that death will definitely arrive, we start to make preparations. Like, for example, should you know that death will occur tomorrow, today you will make preparations. So if you think of what will be of help for me when death arrives, should it arrive tomorrow, and what do I need to prepare for that? You can think of things that will be helpful to future lives, but also things that will be helpful to this life. So if you can become mindful of the certainty of death, but also the uncertainty of the time of death, and that it could be actually happening quite soon, you can then look at what course of actions is most suitable to do, something that will be good for this and future lifetimes as well. Awesome.
Last thing to say that thank you.
Thank you. Shall we leave it here for now? So I'll put on the dedication prayers on the screen.
The Lamrim
which, and I forgot again to open the not so funny Lamrim prayer, Kasa Lamrim Tamagi.
Yeah.
All right, let's try to find the final Lamrim prayer. Lamrim prayer, page 123. Sorry? The retreat book in page 339. Just a second, I'll try to find it here. No, I failed. All right, 339. Sorry, people at home.
Dene rindun bevle tsoni ne kandere yamba kanshi sava de lome mari kindon rowa namden gyawe ombo da gyurji teman sunbe seru kundu yang jambi yangi zewe jizonde tembe rinba konzan lam jinjo nyene dribe gyanam nyeje rangi chishin dobe lam jine shura zewe chamwe tamgi Drowi yegi mamba sajini gyawe denba yurin zingirch denba rinjin chogi make bom kyabjan nyambar gyuwi choden yinji jimbe yirib gyabaye pende dede sawar cheba sijin gyawe mejong chilele ledro chanchu lamgi rinbe tangde namgi yela bardeshin gyawe zimba rindu kyonggirch lamzan dribin tujin druji jin gajin sijin medam Sarva kundu gyave ngabaye namda lamda chavar ma gyurch kanzi tepan chola chuju ju sujin jula zomba tiye tunden namje tadu choji jin jashi jam chogun kyab gyuru ji.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. Rinpoche make banan ke yuji gewa nyamba meba kone kondu bewara sho kowe shinkanzo pendan dewa malun jongwe chenre sewa denzen yangzo ye shabe sindi bardu tengyuro chi chamjin jamgun gyawe Tenzin chompe gonso lobo Chosum kowe le mandu gyuru Panda so du jin gundu shabden sho. Thank you.